Welcome everybody to SEO Office Hours. My name is Michael Chidzey. I'm an SEO here at Good Signals. And part of what we do, along with special guests, are these office hour sessions where people can jump in and ask their questions around their website and web search. By the way, nobody here is in the hot seat and we might not know all the answers, but multiple heads thinking about a problem should help. We have a bunch of questions submitted already, as you can see, but if there's anybody here live on the call that would like to ask any questions, feel free to flag yourself in the chat functionality, which will be monitored. Also, we usually have a bunch of SEOs on the call. Please continue to share your perspectives. I think that's one of the best things about SEO Office Hours. It isn't just the four of us, but it's everybody else as well. So please feel free to share that in the chat, and Natalia will be summarizing. So you might have noticed that Joe's not with us this week. Instead, we have a different co-host. Good morning, Natalia. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very well. Today, Friday, you might have heard that there's a huge Windows blackout, so I'm very pleased to be using a Mac. I don't know if you guys have seen the news that apparently airports, banking systems, it's Black Mirror today, but I'm happy we are here. Thank you for having me again.
Oh, pleasure. Would you mind introducing a special guest for today?
Yes, so we are really in for a treat today, because today we are having two very experienced SEO professionals. For those of you who don't know me, I'll start with myself, and then I'll pass on the voice to our guest. I'm Natalia Witczyk. I'm an international SEO consultant based in Barcelona. I run a consultancy business called Mosquita Digital, where I do international SEO for Google and beyond. And I am joined today by John Wright, who has got a decade of freelance digital strategy experience. A decade next month, actually, I've checked. And he is an avid cyclist, but we won't mention that because apparently there's been some recent knee and steroid-involved injury. So we're just gonna go versatile way to other hobbies, because he likes shed building and repairing many TVs he owns. So quite a vast interest. And also he frequents many SEO events, but you might meet him at a pub, not specifically at the stage. Welcome, John. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Natalia. What a lovely introduction.
Was it a fair introduction? Because there's a lot of details about it that are very interesting.
Bang on. Love it. Thanks.
Great. What's your next event? What's the next place we can meet you, actually? Any agenda for this year for conferences?
Got me there now. Let's get this one out the way and I'll let you know.
Perfect.
You were saying maybe Brighton SEO, you might go to that, John. We were talking it the other day.
Get your hotel in now and save yourself a few quid.
Yeah, that's actually where we've met, John. Last Brighton SEO.
That's right. Yeah, over a couple of quiet beers down on the seafront.
I feel like I still owe you and Michael some pints, so I'll definitely come this year.
All right, next time. Yeah, definitely.
And our next guest today is Lee Wilson, who also has a wealth of digital experience, 14 years in the current company, starting with SEO background, and now it's actually services, delivery services. He oversees that at Vertical Leap. And he's a published author of 3 industry books, and that's before AI, that's actual books. So we have to give a huge credit to that. Also, he collaborates with Search Engine Journal, The Drum, and more. And colleagues said, because I've had a little sneak peek at his profile, that he's one of the most motivated and helpful colleagues they've ever had. So lovely to have you, Lee. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Lovely to be back again. Yeah, nice to meet everybody this morning. And yeah, keen to get going, get stuck in.
Fantastic. Over to you, Mike, with the first questions.
Great. Yeah, let's get cracking. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat, but we'll start with these.
Yeah, I'll have an eye on the chat, so please keep typing in, commenting, answering the questions, and we'll try to resume that later for the call.
Great. Oh no, Steve said it's already too late for Brighton hotels. Yeah, without spending a lot of money. That is the problem with Brighton SEO, isn't it? Okay, first question. I represent 3 distinct venues in close proximity. Would it be more effective to create a single comprehensive website highlighting all 3 locations, or creating individual websites for each venue to highlight their unique character and offering? Anyone got any thoughts on this? Who would like to? John, you're nodding. Yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you could argue this from both directions. My gut feel would be to just build one, because Especially if you're running venues, my experience of hospitality is that you're always very busy. So you've got 3 websites. You've got a job there to maintain all 3. You could just build one really top-notch website that amalgamates the 3 locations. There's no reason why you can't get those. I presume they're in different locations. There's no reason why you can't manage that. Again, you could argue having the separate ones. I don't think the venue sites necessarily have to have enormous deep pools of content. So yeah, I know that's not really a clear answer. What one or the other, really. It depends on your available time and resources.
Yeah, I think it depends on the objectives, doesn't it, really? If they're very distinct target audiences, if the positioning, the messaging, the branding is very different, it might be a bit disjointed if someone lands on one site and then different subfolders have very different kind of look and feel and all that kind of stuff. But if they're all aligned in the same type of audience, there can definitely be benefits of all being in the same website because you're pooling your authority. As John said, you're minimizing your kind of overlap. Having to sort of do the same thing 3 times is certainly challenging. And I think if you're a smaller business, for sure, the simpler you can make things, the better. And the same for even things like authority building and backlink building. It can be useful to have them pulled into one website, but it really depends on your objectives and how aligned those audience types are, I think. So if I'm a user, what makes sense for me? Are they related venues or are they very different? If you're targeting teenagers in one venue and OAPs in another, obviously that's a fairly extreme example, but yeah, it's unlikely you'll be able to find a middle ground that resonates with both on the same website. So it just depends on the objective and the target audience, what makes sense, I'd say.
Great. Natalia, do you have any thoughts?
No, I really agree with Lee here. I think it does depend. And I think Search Console is your friend. Just check how those domains position themselves now. And if you can see that they really overlap, they probably compete with each other. It's a different story than if they completely occupy different keywords now. So I would say, yeah, have a look and investigate from the keyword perspective, which should lead to the business kind of perspective and targeting.
Yeah, so I agree with everybody. I think the SEO in me is thinking it makes sense to have one website where, every time for one, it's easier to keep one website than it is to manage 3. And also, like Lee was saying, when it comes to things like coverage and links and so on, actually, when that's pointing to one website, it effectively helps all 3 venues. So there's that part of me, but then actually from a user perspective, a bit like Lee was saying, depending on how different the venues are, it could be a little bit confusing. So for example, if you've got 3 venues and they're all under the domain, something like Bermondsey Hotels, you might think that's a third-party website rather than actually being the official venue website. And therefore you could also lose out on that coverage and links and so on because the journalist doesn't think that's like the official website. Yeah, and can be confusing to users, not just journalists. So I was trying to let somebody in at the same time. If they're not sure whether that's the official website or not. I think the other thing is when it comes to things like venues, I used to work in that sort of space. And you often have very different events and things like that. If you've got one website with 3 venues and you've got an event section that kind of looks after the menus or the events or the different things that are happening, that could also be confusing. So the SEO in me says, yep, keep it as one. But if it's not really about SEO and it's just about creating something that you want people locally to be able to find you, then I personally would probably go down having the 3 different ones. Some people tend to do both, and then they might utilize certain SEO tags like rel canonical. I think that might be a bit complicated, but that's another way around it, where you have one website for your individual venue, and then you have a group website that just links out to those individual ones.
I think the other challenge as well, isn't it, is when you've got 3 distinct websites, it's trying to create sort of really useful, meaningful, helpful content for those sites, especially when there's a lot of overlap. So if all the company pages are the same, if the only thing that really changes is the venue, it's pretty tough to then make something meaningful 3 times without it being really thin, kind of copied content that kind of feels very boilerplate or templated. And you tend to, I think, focus on one site and you become a bit subjective, whether you intend to or not.
Yeah,
it tends to be like an originator site, and then the others are just content, which is, I don't know, it never really feels as credible and as useful as it does if it's just one version. I think when you're struggling to recreate content 3 times, it's like maybe that's not the right thing to do. It just depends, doesn't it? And if you've got a whole unique team in each location, they've all got lots of great social media content and everything else they're producing from the unique events and things, it's, you know, it could be probably very easy. But on the other side, if it's, you know, an event that happens once a quarter and everything else remains static and not updated, it just feels like it could be quite tough to create good content 3 times over as well.
Yeah, totally. And like John was saying on that, if you work in hospitality, chances are you actually don't get that much time to update websites and so on. So at least if you've got one website, you're more likely to look at it on a regular basis than if you've got 3 different ones. So yeah, I hate saying it depends, but it really does. But hopefully those thoughts have helped. Natalia, is there anything in the chat?
Yeah, so we have Simon saying a lot depends on the branding. And if each has its own, then go for the individual sites. It makes sense from marketing perspective. I agree with that point.
Yeah, I think also put yourself in the user's shoes and just think, what would you expect if you were looking for, so for instance, if they're wedding venues, for example, would you expect them to have their own websites with their own menus and all of that sort of stuff? I think very much not necessarily just about SEO if you're thinking about that. But chances are, if you're only setting this up now, chances are you've probably got something in place already. And if you've already got individual websites versus if you're thinking about bringing them together, it might just be easier to improve what you've got rather than moving all of them around, because venues tend to change ownership and things like that. But often they've already got some sort of presence from before. Great. Okay, next question. This is quite a long one, so I'm going to read it from my screen if that's okay. I started writing it out and it was taking forever. So this is one about GA4. I'm trying to filter out data from GA4. We tag staff with user type in the sort of parameters of the URLs, and we know that staff only visit the admin directory. When I'm looking at filters, only URL options I see are landing page and query strings, or page path and screen class. There seems to be no way of filtering out page path and query strings. Basically, I just want to exclude a load of URLs, some of which are from a query string that are getting into our reports. I've seen a few videos and I haven't seen anything that answers this particular question. Most are about filtering by IP address, which won't work for us. It seems odd that there doesn't seem to be a way of filtering out page path and query strings, as it just seems to be a basic need. And I would have thought there should be an easy way to do it. Is there no way to do this at data stream level? It just seems such a basic thing to do, to exclude certain data from a whole property, as opposed to constantly having to filter it out. This was something really easy in GA3. We will copy that in the chat. Apologies if you keep along with. Effectively, they have URLs that have parameters that are specific to staff. That's getting called up in all of their data that they're seeing in GA4. And the person wants to know, is there a way to filter this out? Beforehand in Universal, you could basically do that at view level. If that's now data streams, which is different. And they basically just want help with that. Any thoughts? Who would like to kick off on this one? John, do you want to go for it?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Okay. So this is the kind of the techie bits, and especially around analytics. I do have a passion point around it because it's often where people get stuck. And what I've found is that you can generally fix a lot of this kind of stuff with your tag, the way you're tagging the site. And I believe on this, you could probably restrict those parameter URLs from even landing in GA in the first place. So as long as you're running your analytics container via a tagging solution, and it's not like a direct integration, and it'll take a bit of custom work. I think there might be a template you can get. So you're basically modifying the variable that pulls the page location, chop off the query string part of the URL before that gets sent into the data stream, because obviously Tag Manager's running your analytics. So you could look at that. You have to be careful with what you're stripping off, because if you're doing things like query strings could apply to paid traffic as well. Where's that going to happen? Going to be stripping stuff out before it hits those ad channels. Yeah. The other thing, I get the thing with GA4 in particular is the baked in reports. So I think a lot of people rely on those, the standard baked reports you've got in GA4, which don't always, they're not always quite right. I think learning how to bespoke reports from the ground up, exporting data, Looker Studio, or if you've got a big query set up, then you can do so much more with your data set than just relying on GA4. I'm guessing that with this individual, the fact they're trying to do as much as they can with GA4 and failing, maybe they're not working with other types of infrastructure around that. So perhaps it's time to start looking kind of outside of the box and trying to go beyond what is possible within GA4 itself, because I think you can achieve it, but getting to the realms of the more kind of technical end of your analytics, your marketing.
I'd suggest that on top of that as well, you can look at the Explore reports, right? You can filter out stuff within there. So there's the opportunity in the page screen area where you can select page path and query string, and then you can set the relevant filters to filter stuff out in there. And I'd suggest it's a good idea to probably do that regardless of any other solution you might do as well, because then you can see how much is falling into those areas and then check that you're not excluding additional wanted traffic, if you like, as well, which John was talking about earlier on. You can also filter out page path and query string in the main reports in GA4, but you're limited to how many you can add. So you want to prioritize and make sure you're only using them if necessary. So there's a couple of options there. And it isn't as easy as what it was in GA3 to just exclude these things, or it doesn't feel like it is anyway, but maybe that's a kind of a learning thing, actually, because obviously it's very different in lots of ways. But yeah, there's a couple of options. But yeah, I'd say go to the exploration reports and for landing pages and have a play that way, because it shouldn't take long to do it. You're literally looking at a specific dimension like landing pages or something, and then adding in the specific filtering out. So it should be fairly quick.
Great. Natalia, do you have any thoughts on this one?
I think the previous responses are perfect. I'm not a huge fan of GA4. I think I'm not the only one. I leave it to the pros. I backed off of doing analytics as much as I used to, and now I solely focus on actually understand.
Great. So I'm actually the opposite. I do really like GA4. I particularly like the exploration section because that was something we didn't have before, and it feels if you've got questions you want to try and answer, rather than having those kind of static reports, now we can play with the data and do what we like, either in exploration or put it through to something like Looker Studio. So in terms of, I prefer not to filter out data just because you actually might want to see what your staff are doing. And instead, I would either segment, or you can build audiences based on things like behaviors. So if you know they're the ones that visit the admin page, then, which is what you said in the question, then you'd be able to do that. And like Lee was saying, around using the filter option in exploration at the bottom of the reports, you can filter certain things. So if you've got parameters based on URLs, then you can filter those out. Or you can also create segments as well if you've got a few different options. I think maybe my preference in this situation would be to start playing in the exploration section and getting used to that, rather than, because I think with GA4, the sort of standard reporting is quite similar to Universal, and therefore people tend to go to that. But I would say start becoming familiar with the exploration section because it's so cool. It's so much better. Great. Have we got anything in the chat, or are we okay to go to the next one?
We're okay to go to the next one.
Yeah, honestly, I really think it's Joe that holds us back, Natalia. I said this last time. We're flying through them already. Look, it's 10. You can still go on the first question. I'm joking. Okay, next question. I'm going to read this one as well because this is a slightly longer one from the screen, rather than try and rely on my writing. So we've been holding regular company-wide town halls, and until recently, we've seen consistent month-over-month growth in SEO metrics like rankings, traffic, and domain authority. These are easy for everybody to understand, so they've been a great way to show progress. However, the past few months have been flat. No dramatic drops, but no upward trajectory we're used to. I'm wondering how to best explain this to the entire company, especially since most aren't familiar with SEO. The goal is to be transparent without making it seem like the team isn't doing their job. We want to emphasize that we're still championing their efforts, even if the numbers aren't reflecting it right now. Any thoughts on how to frame this conversation in a way that's both honest and encouraging? Does anybody else have town halls? Is that something that you've had to do? Natalia, you're nodding. How do you fancy taking this one on?
I can start, sure. I think we've all been there with some projects, especially if you are freelance and you have multiple industries and clients. Not all of them keep growing. The potential for SEO is tapped to actual interest. So there's several questions here. have you become the industry leader and you're actually getting the traffic that belongs to your industry and there's not much more you can do? Maybe you've been so successful and you shouldn't really get traffic from something that's not relevant anyway. So maybe you're there. Maybe you should check Google Trends. Maybe just check really what the global interest in your topic, in your niche is, and understand how it corresponds with what your progress has been. Maybe it's been growing and now it's not something that people Google as much anymore. So there's few data points that you can use to actually understand how well you're doing. Maybe against competitors as well, just to showcase, look, we've actually positioned 1 for top commercial keywords. There's not more we can do. We're getting those clicks. Or you became stagnated in your strategy and you have to rethink what you're doing and take it from completely different angle. But I feel like checking if you're the leader will actually answer that question already. Because if you're not the leader, then what we're not doing at all, that maybe a competitor is doing. So yeah, between trends, competitors, it's a good place to actually see how you're doing.
So I think they're all great points there. I think that makes perfect sense. I'll just say there's a couple of other bits. So one is the education piece about sometimes plateauing is normal and part of the course. Sometimes it's seasonal, sometimes it's industry specific, sometimes there's a pandemic going on. There's all sorts of things that can skew things. So I think there's an education piece that plateauing or slowing down growth isn't always a bad thing, right? Sometimes it's just a thing. And so I think as human beings, we sometimes try to justify everything in the data in a human way, as in it's positive or it's negative, it's black, it's white, whatever. But actually, a lot of the time, it just isn't. There's a narrative that this is just the data. And I think that's fine sometimes. People shouldn't feel uncomfortable if something's going downwards because they're there to report on progress, whether that's positive, indifferent, negative. And then the other side of it, I think it's always worth having another layer to when you're doing updates outside of just the top line metrics. So for me, it's about focusing on the impact of the actions you're taking. If you're focusing on a specific topic or product area or location of the website or whatever it might be, it's important to understand how that's performing underneath that top level line. And so I think, it gives you more confidence and opportunity to showcase positive and progress and to keep morale going and to ensure people see the value in SEO and what you're doing and all that sort of stuff. But also from a point of view of knowing that what you're doing is having the desired impact too. So if you're focusing on an area and that's performing worse than the top level site, then you're probably not doing the right things. If you're focusing on an area and it's outperforming the industry, the trends, the competition, your website kind of top performance, in sort of core metric areas, then obviously it is having an impact. And I think having that layered information alongside educating on what the data is, and then just providing a narrative. I think data is very subjective. So if you show a room of 20 people the same charts, they'll all draw varied conclusions, even if you assume that it's really obvious. Most of the times it really isn't, because it depends on what sort of filters people are looking at the data from. So I think there's just a narrative that goes alongside it. We've got lots of customers from different industries and all sorts of things. And inevitably, whilst there's some consistencies in how you report, the narrative is often very different depending on what's required and what is meaningful to the people in the room. So I think it's just, it's trying to gauge what resonates and what works with the people in the room and just tailor the data, as in how you talk about the data according up, down, flat, whatever is what it is. So definitely don't hide from what the actual data is saying, but just be clear on what the broader context and narrative is, because I think that's where expertise comes into play. It's like data is numbers, but what do those numbers mean? And what are we doing to influence those numbers? What have we done to impact those numbers? What's the plan around them? So I think there's a much bigger story that always goes alongside the data.
Great. John, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, that's a great point on the data. This it's almost uncanny. I took a client on about 6 months ago, and their site traffic had been exponentially growing. And I inherited this website from an agency, and it's literally it's almost the day that I touched the website. I literally hadn't done anything, and traffic started to drop off. And so there was Google decided to roll an update out, but at the same time, I discovered that the site had been hacked, classic WordPress site. And there was this really irritating and intermittent kind of spammy redirect that wasn't always visible. So I was saying to them, look, your site's been hacked. And looking at the index, you could see even that Googlebot was bouncing on pages. The site was there and it couldn't reach anything, but then the site would be up. and it was a really odd time. So I set up an uptime robot just to monitor the site. I was able to show that there were outages, and we eventually proved that the site had been hacked. Rankings haven't quite recovered. We're looking back over 3 months now. Traffic has recovered. I think the other point there is, what are these guys doing? So you've got the data. Are there any other outside kind of forces at play? Are you absolutely certain? What have you done or haven't done that is different to your usual routine? Do you have a continual trajectory on content marketing, building new content? Have you eased up on that? It was said with the competitors or local trends. What are those topics you're going after? Have you exhausted, your market? Have you naturally reached a plateau in what you can possibly get? Because when I was talking to this client, I think they had it in their head that they were untouchable and that traffic was just going to carry on growing. And, there is a finite search opportunity there. You don't have an endless number of clicks. You can't just keep going up. So I think it's, like Lee said, especially with the data, it is subjective. Trying to troubleshoot that and work out what is going on, and is there anything else going on in the wider picture that maybe hasn't been noticed that could be impacting rankings, because it's not always so simple as users, clicks, and if that makes sense. Yeah, get the magnifying glass out and dig a bit deeper there, because there will be a plausible explanation to your colleagues as to why that's happened. It's not like you just push a button and suddenly falls apart. There's things at play.
I think it's really interesting, actually. And I think there's also a kind of a relevancy point or a business impact point as well, because sometimes metrics drop off because you've blocked bot traffic, or all of a sudden you're not being spammed by other areas that aren't specific to your business. Or as a business, you might have made decisions like you don't do a particular product range anymore, and so you've naturally lost the traffic and rankings that coincide with that. If you're commercially doing as well or better as a business, and yet some of the vanity metrics are declining, like maybe there's a kind of a due diligence piece on what you're reporting specifically, because there might be some real legitimacy within the data that says we've lost some irrelevant stuff, but it's irrelevant. So actually we're now gaining more qualified quality traffic or revenue or rankings or whatever it might be. So I think there's a qualification piece sometimes, because you can look at a top level number, like number of number one rankings or top 10 rankings and total traffic and all these things, but they're only meaningful if they're having a business impact. If it's just kind of vanity impressions and things, it's you just need to drill down into it a bit more, because a flat story could actually be a really positive upwards trend in areas that matter commercially. So it's just trying to dig into it a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, I love what Simon's just dropped in the chat, actually, about if traffic drop after an agency's been involved. I don't know what you're saying there, mate. Are you suggesting for a minute they might have been manipulating things there? But on the subject of tools being taken off, actually, I've only come along and whacked all my tools on there as well. Command hundreds of times each day, see if we can move the dial. But
Great.
Yeah.
This one has actually sparked a lot of this discussion here in the chat. I think many people can relate. So Simon has said before, so keeping it flat and not tailing off is always a win. And also focus on your competition wins to get more budget. That's an interesting one. Actually, maybe that's an opportunity for you to say, we need more resources to do better now. And someone also said in the chat that AI overviews could be contributing to the drop of traffic, though it might not be significant. But it's a good hint to actually check the SERP and understand what happened, because maybe there has been a change in the way your first position displays, and maybe you really dropped off those clicks, but visibility is there. And also there's been a comment from John saying, check global, local, and industry trends, which is also an interesting point, because there's obviously wider business perspective on what's happening in the world. Maybe simply people are not spending as much anymore on this kind of industry, or maybe locally there's something going on. So yeah, there's a lot of food for thought here.
Yeah, the search engine result change pages is a really interesting one, because you may have got a ton of impressions and clicks from a pre-result or people also ask and all those sorts of things. And yeah, you're right. A perceived small change where you might have ranked above the result for a particular question or something, and all of a sudden that's removed, or a competitor's placed there, or in some cases like the healthcare sort of sector, where a lot of the results then shifted towards specific healthcare providers as opposed to some of the smaller sites. They can be massively impactful, those sorts of things. And probably with all the different sort of scaling back of AI overviews and how the volume of queries they impact, that's probably causing a bit of fluctuation for quite a few people too, I expect.
Just for another thing as well, I don't know where these guys are getting the data from, but if they're sat there behind GA and just looking at that, I do like to get into Search Console, see exactly what's going on there. Google certainly accounts for that kind of 80-90% of search traffic likely. What's happening there is probably, in terms of organic, is going to be probably easier to interpret than perhaps looking at Google Analytics. So yeah, it's going to take a bit of troubleshooting, I think.
Great. Yeah, I do a lot of reporting, and I think some of the things that I've learned is I think you have to be really careful when you're sharing the same KPIs every single month, that you're not setting yourself up to fail. So if you're just providing domain authority, organic traffic in general, and rankings, the problem is with rankings, for example, if you've got one of the tools and you drop from position 67 to position 100, you might have a drop in, say, visibility score or something like that, but it means absolutely nothing to the business. So I think when it comes to stuff like that, it needs to be more meaningful things. I personally tend to report on things like inquiries or sales or leads that actually make a difference to the business. Because the problem with things like these, the sort of metrics like organic traffic, like some of the other guys were saying, is if you decide to go in, do a load of content pruning, so get rid of loads of blog posts, for example, that mean nothing to the business, you're going to see a drop in organic traffic, despite the fact that you're probably making your website better. So what I would say is I would probably reevaluate the sort of what you're actually presenting in these town halls. The thing that I really focus on is I tend to focus more on the input, so what we're actually doing, because we don't have control of the outputs, and I use those as indicators to show what we're doing, whether that's successful or not. Very rarely will just share information based on month by month. I actually tend to look at maybe across the year, provide those graphs when it comes to organic traffic, for example, for sections of the business that matter, so maybe commercial pages, and I tend to show that over, say, a 6-month period or a year period versus the same time last year. And if we are looking at month by month, I might be sharing. So you said about domain authority, I wouldn't bother with that at all. What I would focus on is, if you're focusing on campaigns, I would share some of the coverage that you've got. We got you into, I don't know, OK Magazine, or we got you into one of these places. People also get that, but they'll probably understand that across the company more so than they will domain authority. Personally, if it was me, I'd reevaluate that stuff. The other thing is, I learned very early on not to high five myself when things are going well and it's nothing to do with me. I never, when the mobile update came in years and years ago, and I reported back to a client how well they'd done, and they were like, I don't understand why you're not really happy about this. Why aren't you high fiving yourself? And actually, it was nothing to do with us. It was just the fact that our website, the website we were working on, was in a better position than some of the others, which I explained to the client. And it works both ways. When times are really good, you try and, like you explain, when times are bad, what's happening. I try and do that when times are good as well. So a bit like Lee was saying, you're providing that narrative and that education point throughout. Just to summarize what I was saying, I would focus on the inputs, not necessarily the outputs, but use them as an indicator and over a longer period than a month. Yeah, I really like doing versus the same time last year as well, because I think that really shows, if you are going to do it monthly, it really shows the sort of difference that you've had. And when you show also over a longer period of time, Lee and John were saying, actually being flat isn't a bad thing. If you've seen that growth, what you've done there is you've maintained that. Sorry, I hope I don't sound like a politician right now with how I'm positioning it, but I feel like that's the most transparent way and try and help them understand. Oh, and the last thing is always focus on what you're going to work on next as well at the sort of town hall. So our priorities are also this, then I think that could be quite useful. Anybody, anything else? Or are we happy to jump to the next question? Great, okay. Okay, so sorry, I've missed this one. How do you prepare for an algorithm update? So we've got, obviously, it was in, I don't know if it's been updated in Search Engine Land, but they had a few days ago around the fact that there's one coming in a few weeks' time. Sorry, I've just seen Simon's response about hold your breath. So obviously somebody's seen this. How do you prepare for it? What can you do? Natalia, how do you fancy going first on this one?
Absolutely happy to say what's my take on it. If you are worried about an upcoming search update, you're not doing things right. You shouldn't be stressed or anxious. specifically, because typically core updates are often very, let's say, paced in a couple of months. You always have a core update. So the fact that we know now in advance, it's not new. It's just, I think, the comment that I think Danny Sullivan has slipped in one of the other conversations. So it's not a surprise there's going to be another core update. The question is, what are you afraid of? Are you doing something that's against Google policy and you think you're going to get caught this time? Otherwise, you shouldn't really be worried, and there's nothing you can do other than continuous SEO strategy that you've been implementing over time. That's my take on it. I'm white hat. That's my prejudiced view of it.
I think that makes sense, right? You can understand the purpose of core algorithm updates is to refine things. It's to make sure that the sites that should be performing continue to perform. Those that haven't had the recognition should receive more of it. They always come back to the fundamentals of providing something that's accessible to people, that loads fast, that renders effectively, that works on all devices, that showcases your expertise, that all of these things, right? So I think that the goal of core algorithm updates and algorithm updates generally is to provide a better experience, a better set of results, and to enable the right sites and content to perform and rank and all of that. There is a reality that doesn't always work. We see things, I think, with any filtering or changes that you apply to something, there's always going to be an element of fallout where some sites have been impacted negatively, but generally speaking, and they tend to be there for a purpose, and that purpose is to make search better and to keep it iteratively refining and improving, and to apply all of the logic from quality raters feedback and everything else to keep making the results we see improve, because people won't keep going back to the main search engines if they don't provide the right content for them. They'll go somewhere else. There's never been so much competing opportunities to discover content than what there is now in all sorts of platforms and ways outside of traditional search. And then I think it's right. I mean, you should be regularly auditing, your content, whether people are engaging with it, whether people are exiting or bouncing, or whether the content's acquiring backlinks, whether it's doing what you expect it to be doing. And if not, there's probably things that you should be looking at and fixing on an ongoing basis. I think, any form of earned media like SEO is hard work, right? You have to earn it. It's not like you get the result and it stays there forever. The point is that you should be using all of that data, a new data set, new search queries, new user data, first party information from the people engaging with your site to keep making things better, right? So if you're doing that already, you're probably in a fairly good place, and you probably shouldn't be that worried about core algorithm updates. And then if you do find yourself negatively impacted by them, it's probably a case that you're unwittingly doing something or not doing something you probably could be. And then maybe you just need to seek a bit more expertise and specialist advice to try and help you to figure that stuff out, right? And that might be an agency, or it might be Google directly. There's a ton of helpful stuff online as well, which is free and accessible. And even platforms like LinkedIn are very good now with communities giving useful information as opposed to it being about recruitment or whatever it might be. So yeah, I agree with everything that was said previously on it, really. And just if you're not deliberately doing things to game the system, you're probably okay. If you want to get optimum performance from these changes, then you need to be doing the right things consistently. And it comes back to the fundamentals, really.
Great, John. How do you prepare for a core update? What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean,
rushing around?
All of the above, but next, I don't think it's a question of how do you prepare for the next update. It's how do you prepare for the update in 12 months' time. If you're doing something, keep your hands clean, first and foremost, as Umama's put in the chat, which I think is right up my list there. But if you're worried about the next update, there's nothing you can do or prepare other than preparing to panic when it all starts to fall apart. There's nothing you can do today to impact what that update is going to do to your site tomorrow, maybe 6 months, 12 months away. You can manage that. It takes time if you've been spamming your site with automated AI copy and that's sat in the index, you've got a job there. If you realize you overcooked it, or if you're inheriting a site from somebody else and they've overcooked the AI, it's going to take time to unpick their negative strategies and all of those signals that content is giving off. It's going to take time to wash them out, if you like. Yeah. Think to the future, sustainable SEO practices, really. Those updates next year, the year after, that's what I'd be focusing on.
Great advice. But by the way, I'm going to assume that the person isn't necessarily somebody that's been doing anything badly, but actually that maybe sometimes I think our industry, particularly some of the news publications, can be quite terrifying if you're new to SEO or if you have a website and if you come across something like that and you read about this core algorithm update and what it's going to do to your website. And actually chances are it's not going to do anything. It's just the idea is it's meant to improve the web. I'm going to assume that this person didn't know, and don't panic. Don't worry, there's not anything you can do apart from just improve your website in the long term. But that's not something we can do for this particular update. We haven't got long, and I feel like we've got two quite fairly important questions. Natalia, is there anything else in the chat before we jump onto?
I'm just gonna take one comment that I think really stands out from the others because everyone else confirmed what we've said. John from Google said, I think there's also a bit of worry for those who are borderline, not real spam, but perhaps not fantastic. I think the best approach there is a long-term improvement to get away from that blurry line. And that's many months.
Great.
That's a good take, I think. And that many people feel they're not perfect. So that's why maybe they're worried.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, next question. I'm in the final interview stages for an SEO role in an incredibly competitive industry. They've asked me to submit a 90-day plan. To be honest, I was planning to use that time to learn about the business and industry. However, I don't think that will be a satisfactory answer or response. Any thoughts? Has anyone been in this situation? Is it okay to say that? Lee, how fancy starting?
Yeah, for sure. So I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to know more about the business and the industry and all that sort of stuff, but I think you need to pad it out a bit, right? So part of the interview process is showing like that you're keen and enthusiastic and expansive in how you apply for things. It's an opportunity to show your work ethic, your approach, your creativity, and all these other areas. I think if you just miss the opportunity when you think somebody else won't, it's a competition, right? I think it's fine to say that, but I think you would probably have lots more specific actions like getting access to core company data and analytics, completing initial audits on SEO, like tracking and performance, for example, benchmarks, reviewing their reporting, having initial meet and greet sessions with key stakeholders. There's so much that you could put into there. And I would also really tailor it based on your interview process so far, because whatever you've learned during that process, you've got an opportunity to apply some of that. So a 90-day roadmap, it doesn't feel like it's a long period of time, but actually what you're trying to get across is the sort of the initial impact that you can have. So it's not just about what I can learn from the business, but what I can impart into the business. And yes, there's a learning and understanding, functional elements to that, but I'd really use it as a chance to be creative and to shine and to present something that's going to make you stand out from everybody else. Because if it's a really competitive industry and a great role, don't miss that opportunity by not really going for it. I think there's lots of ways in which you can do it, but just try and do something that's a little bit different, that shows and showcases your kind of, your personality, your approach, your skill sets. If you're massively into visual aids and things like that, then create something visual to present that. If you're into your spreadsheets and Gantt charts and all that sort of stuff, then use those. It's a chance to really shine based on your application of it. I think if you just go into it with, I'm going to learn a little bit about your business and the industry, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not going to make you stand out from everybody else, is it? I think present the best version of you that you can do in a unique way that's specific to you. I think,
Amazing. John, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess you could submit a 9-day plan and say that you misread the request. Not sure that's going to go down so well. You could give ChatGPT a go. That would be fun, wouldn't it? But in all honesty, I don't know about you guys, but I look at it doesn't matter the size. You can look at any website and within about 10 minutes, you're probably formulating quite a few ideas in your head about what is actually wrong with that website. But by and large, the longer term, in 3 months, I don't think it's going to take longer to get the bare bones of a strategy down. If you're looking at a site and it's full of holes and there's things wrong with it, what needs to be done, but what needs to be improved. I think you can get this stuff down quite quickly. Like Lee said, it's about padding that out into something that's a bit more useful for the client. But be careful not to generalize. A lot of websites need much the same kind of thing doing to them. And it's an improvement of content. It's an improvement of structure. It's an improvement of offsite signals. Every website's different and the recipe will be completely different, but the bare bones of what you're probably going to be doing on the site are by and large the same. It's why, as an SEO, your job description you've got lots of things on there, but it's generally keywords, content, links. These same things are there, and I don't see why your SEO strategy over 90 days would be vastly different. And good luck with the interview. I'd absolutely deliver a banger of a 90-day strategy and just go in there to win the job. Don't shy away from that. Go in there and nail it, because the other 10 candidates going for the job, 8 of them probably won't go the extra mile. And if you can go the extra mile on that, get your tool, run some crawls, try to extract something, really find something wrong, whatever it is. There will be something wrong with that website, whatever it is, structured data, whatever it is. There's going to be something wrong. You're going to find issues with something somewhere on the blog. Run some page speed checks. There's going to be something there that you can get in there, get a bit of secret sauce in there. But that 90-day strategy is probably quite similar to another website. And if you've got a good experience within optimizing websites and digital marketing, I don't think it would be too hard to formulate that plan. I think the challenge is probably getting that into a really nice slide deck that doesn't look shit, and that you can really nail an interview and practice your presentation as well. It's easy to go into an interview and you haven't practiced what you're going to say. So deliver a blind presentation and you might find you're on the way to getting that new job.
Great. Natalia, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with the previous comments. And I'm going to add that every interview question looks for not only what, but how and why. And I think your first answer to get to know the business is already great. Now you have to explain how you're going to do it and why in this order. So I would say break it down into 5 or 10 slides. Who do you meet first? Which team? Is it the commercial team? Is it the developers? Why did you pick this team as the first one? Is it the commercial objective, or do you want to have a good rapport with the developers? And if you justify that well enough, just breaking down how you get to know the business is already a great starting point. So this strategical answer behind all of it. Same with the SEO plan. Why do you start with this? Do you start with Search Console audit? Or maybe you do backlinks? Whatever it is, justify it. And just that thinking and explanation is going to take you a long way.
Amazing answers. I agree with everybody. I have to do these things all the time where we get inquiries and basically I'm expected to put a year strategy or plan together after a sort of a 20-minute, half an hour conversation with the client and having a quick look at the website. What I would do is I would put this plan together if I was you, the 90 days, and I'd make it very clear that this is subject to change as you learn, and priorities might change slightly, but you could still put together that plan. As John was saying, if you're applying for an SEO role and you've been in the industry for a while, it's quite easy to look at a website and see where you could make those potential improvements, or you might see some gaps or opportunities or some technical issues. Like Natalia was saying, I would actually make part of your plan. I would break down how you're going to learn about the business, how you're going to learn about the industry, what you're going to learn about competitors, all of that stuff that's basically going to create your strategy. Yeah, I would just break it down. Like John said, I would do a really good presentation on it where and like I said, this is subject to change, but based on what I know now, this is what the next 90 days look like. Obviously, it changes depending on the size of the website or how complex the business is. You would want to include meeting different stakeholders and potentially, for instance, if you haven't got access to their data, I would probably ask for that beforehand and sign an NDA where you get hold of their Search Console and analytics data to see if they're even tracking the right things and so on. But yeah, I think I would just go for it. I would put together a great 90-day plan, subject to change based on what we're learning. And like Natalia was saying, everything you're suggesting, I would just say why I'm doing that. So why I'm going to be finding search competitors and what I'm going to be looking at when I look at their websites and their campaigns and all of that sort of stuff. And then
now the time to roll out my new deck building service.
Yeah, go for it, John.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, no. Simon's remark there, that is it, right? You can come up with a strategy really quickly, but I'm working on sites now that it can take you 90 days to work out, really get under the skin of your competitors and to really understand what is going on at a really granular level, deliver a strategy that it's not a caveat, it's a reality that things aren't set in stone and they can change, but you can get a top line strategy without going in too deep and get it right. But that 90 days is critical. That's the length of your probation period.
Yeah. And also that it's probably just an interview task to see how this person thinks and how much they know about SEO. They're probably not going to make you commit to this set plan, because obviously you're going to be learning as you go. So it's probably just more of a, we want to see how you present. We want to see your knowledge of SEO and what you've learned about our business. We've got less than a minute left. I just want to finish with our final regular question, which is, what are you most excited about in terms of SEO? John, you've probably got about 10 seconds. What are you most excited about?
The unknown. I don't know what's next, and that's really exciting.
Great. Lee, what are you most excited about in terms of SEO?
The next core algorithm update.
Yay. Natalia, what are you most excited about in terms of SEO?
Search Barcelona dinner, which happens on August 6th, organized by Joe.
You've turned into Joe. You've literally, that's what Joe would say. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us live. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to anybody watching afterwards on YouTube. Thank you to those that submitted the questions. I hope that was helpful. And Natalia, thank you so much for co-hosting this week. You did an amazing job. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope everybody has a lovely weekend. Thank you so much. See you next week.
Thanks, guys.